When it comes to cinema lenses, you want your glass to say something. You want some personality or some character. You actually want to use lenses that produce the image that you want to make it look like without having to do a bunch of things in post. Now, over the last couple of weeks, I have been using the Tokina Vista Primes. I've been using the 21 and the 40mm because, well, they sent them to me. Now, these guys are big and they're bulky and they're actually really expensive. However, these might be one of the best looking lenses that I've ever used. But we'll talk about it. Now, like I mentioned, Tokina did give me the opportunity to borrow these lenses for a couple of weeks to shoot some projects on it. And I only had two lenses to choose from, and I decided to go with the 21 and the 40mm focal length for two different reasons. One, I actually just like weird focal lengths like 21s and 12s or whatever the case might be. Anything that's like out of the norm, I kind of gravitate to those lenses because it gives you an interesting look. And also, while using the Red Komodo X, that's more of a like 28mm and a 50mm lens when you're talking about the crop factor that's going to be on each lens. Now, if you are looking to mount this on some of the modern cameras, you're probably going to need an adapter. Now, the Tokina Vista Primes do have two different mounts that you can use in PL and E, which means for the most part, you're probably going to need an adapter to either the PL lenses or the E mount lenses, unless you have a Canon camera or a camera with native PL that's already inside of it. Now, for the size of these lenses, it actually takes the cake in terms of the largest lenses I've ever worked with. In a previous video, I talked about the Zhongji 50mm, which was about 4.4 pounds, and this lens is actually a bit more than that at a whopping 5 pounds. But the build quality is amazing. It's made out of the same metal housing you would get from high quality cinema lenses, and as well, you're gonna have a long focus throw at 300 degrees, and you're also gonna get a front diameter at 114 millimeters, which might also be sort of a downside because you're not gonna be able to use some of the clip-on matte boxes that you have available. I wasn't able to use my Nisi or any of the matte boxes that have 95 millimeters, but I did just get the Polar Pro Base Camp, which has 114, which makes it easier to get NDs on the front of this lens. Also, because it's such a big lens, make sure you have lens support. Even though the adapter is probably going to have a locking mechanism and the KX also has a locking RF mount as well, it never hurts to actually get some support on the front of the lens just to make sure that it doesn't weigh down your camera over time. Now, when talking about the actual image quality out of the Tokina Vista Primes, it goes right up there with some of the best lenses I've actually ever used. It has a certain detail to it. I don't want to necessarily say that it's creamy or it's a little bit softer or it's smooth, because that would imply that it has a lack of resolution, which isn't true because this lens has an 8K resolving power. However, what I will say is its lens is very detailed without being incredibly sharp. You're going to get a lot of detail out of the image that you want out of the Tokina Vista Primes, but at the same time, the roll off from not only the highlights but the bokeh as well is really natural, and it's really smooth and it's pleasing to the eye. You can't really tell that you're working with a modern day photography lens while working with this Cine lens, which is something that you look for in some of the other budget options, but on the Tokina Vista Primes, it does it a world better than some of the other offerings that are available. Now, I am a big fan of my sharper lenses because they're a little bit more malleable and I can put filters in front of them in order to get the look that I want, but there's something about a characteristic already being inside of a lens that's not necessarily the most neutral in the world, especially if my project calls for it. Now, this lens does shoot at t1.5, which is great for me because throughout this entire test, I actually shot in really dark situations, but having an aperture that can go up that high and not having chromatic aberration almost whatsoever. There isn't any chromatic aberration that I was able to find while working with this lens for the last couple of weeks. So not only is it going to be great when I have that darker, moody fitness style that I'm always used to, but at the same time, if I'm shooting wide open, I don't have to worry about any fringing inside of my image. Now, when it comes to flaring that's going to be out of this lens, unfortunately, I haven't done a ton of tests. I simply just took my iPhone, turned on the light, and I put it in front of the lens to see how it would react. And there actually is a lot of bloom in the highlights. They're fairly warm, they're fairly spread out, and it is fairly soft. It kind of feels like I put a Pro Mist on the front of my lens. However, it's built into the character of the Tokina Vista Primes, and it does lean a little bit warmer overall, not just in the flaring test, but just in the overall image itself. Now, for some people, you might like that. Some people like the bloomier highlights when you put light sources in front of it, and some people need something a little bit more neutral and a little bit more sharper that doesn't flare as much, and in that case, you might want to look at something like the Sigma Cine Primes instead. However, the Tokina Vista Primes have a unique character that's not really vintage. It's detailed, but it's not stupidly sharp, but also you're going to get some organic flaring and organic looks, but also you're just going to get an organic look that looks really nice while you're using these lenses. Now, I'm not about to go and put fairy lights in the background and talk about bokeh balls because because the only balls I want to worry about are the ones that I already have. However, I am going to say between the in focus and out of focus areas of the image feels a lot more gradual and not as harsh. If you're using cheaper lenses or more photography lenses, you actually don't notice a graduation between things that are going to be sharp that are obviously in focus and things that kind of fall off in the background in terms of the bokeh. Now, when I'm using the Tokina Vista Primes, the only way I can explain this is that it feels and looks organic. It feels like it's actually meant to be there. It doesn't necessarily feel like you're saying this thing is sharp and this thing is in your face. It's kind of saying like, hey, this is in focus and this is out of focus. It's kind of hard to explain and put a finger on it, but if you're looking at some of the images, hopefully you guys can figure out what I mean. Now, here's where we come to the fun part, and we're going to talk about the price tag in terms of the Tokina Vista Primes in the 21 and the 40mm. Now, your mileage may vary in terms of its price point slightly depending on the focal lengths you get. However, for the most part, they're going to be about $7,000 for each lens, which begs the question of, is this actually a worth it investment for you and your kit? Now, I'm not going to tell anybody how to spend their money. I think obviously these guys are going to be very, 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 very expensive. However, if you're somebody that's looking to build up a high-end cinema lens kit, this might be something that you're going to be looking at, but also keep in mind that you could rent these guys out because of how good they actually look. If you end up renting these guys out, or if you're just working on higher production, then you obviously are just going to build that into your price point. In terms of the lenses itself, in terms of how good they are, I think they're worth the money if you have the money to buy 2 or 3 of these lenses. I don't have that money and I'm probably going to rent them. And the secondary thing for that is that if you don't have the means to actually pick out these lenses, I think it's something that you really want to check out at your local rental shop so you could rent them out and test them out for yourself. And if you're never going to have the money for them, then just rent them out whenever you have a project that's coming up. There's nothing wrong with not having to own every single piece of camera equipment. In fact, the projects that I was showing here, a lot of the stuff were rentals and I don't own them anyways. But when you're talking about a lens like the Tokina Vista Prime, this big, bulky, expensive, amazing looking lens, if you don't have the money to buy it, but you really want to use it, just ask another shop that might. Just make sure you're insured because they're not going to rent these to you if you're not. That being said, I totally think that this is worth trying out. Whether you want to own it yourself or you want to borrow from somebody else, Tokina Vista Primes are a high-end lens that's one of the best I've ever tried. Now, it is going to be big, it's going to be bulky, you're going to need lens support, and it might not work with every follow-focusing motor that's available because of its size. However, the optics that you can get out of this is not only going to give you a look that's really going to say something with your projects, but even when you pair with any of the modern cameras, I think you're going to enjoy it. That being said, if you guys want to know more about these lenses, you can click the link down in the description down below. And a special shout out to Tokina for actually letting me borrow these guys. I actually kind of don't want to give them back, but I have to. But that being said, if you want to see another video, I'm probably going to leave one somewhere over here, especially about the Komodo X because some of you guys have questions. That being said, see you in the next one. Peace.